Now from Washington, the Inside Scoop. All the news the government does not want you to hear.
Welcome to Inside Scoop, Virginia. My name is George Burke. We have a couple of interesting guests with us this year. We are lucky enough to have Senator Mark Herring from the 33rd Senate District. And welcome to Inside Virginia. My name is George Burke. We have two very interesting guests with us tonight, both incumbents. Senator Mark Herring from the 33rd Senate District, which encompasses Fairfax and Loudoun County, and Delegate Steve Shannon from the 35th Delegate District in Fairfax. We're going to start tonight with Senator Herring. And Senator, I'd like you to give the television viewers, tell them a little bit about yourself, please.
Well, thank you, George. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me. I was actually elected in a special election a year ago, January, so I'm a relative newcomer in the General Assembly. I ran for the state Senate in a special election when Senator Mims resigned to accept a position with the Deputy Attorney General, or as Deputy Attorney General. The 33rd Senate District includes a portion of western Fairfax and most of Loudoun County. The area in Fairfax is between the Toll Road and Route 50, heading east toward Fox Mill and West Ox, and encompasses a lot of really great communities, Oak Hill and the Clock Tower area south of Herndon, Franklin Farm and Lee's Corner. They're wonderful people, wonderful communities, and I'm really proud to represent the district. It includes Dulles Airport, which is the nation's fastest growing airport and Virginia's #1 job generator. Includes the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, which is a globally recognized research facility, a lot of great high-tech businesses in the area, and I'm really privileged to represent it. And certainly we have our challenges. Chief among them is transportation, and one of the things I did after being elected was kind of compile all of the comments that I had heard from the residents of the area. Drove around the district to try and identify what the worst traffic bottlenecks were and begin to prioritize those, and I think we've made a lot of success there. And in addition to the transportation issues, I've been working hard on education, making sure our schools are among the best in the nation, and giving localities the tools they need to better manage growth and development.
Steve, you're running for your third term. Please tell the viewers, give them a little background on yourself as well.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for having us here tonight, George. It's a great opportunity for us to reach out to folks in Fairfax County and our constituents in particular. As George said, I was elected in 2003. I'm just finishing up my second term in the Virginia General Assembly. I represent about half of Tyson's Corner, the town of Vienna, Oakton, Wolf Trap, and then I represent the area encompassed by the Fairfax Government Center. I go all the way out to West Ox Road. It's a wonderful district. It's a vibrant district. I represent about 80,000 constituents. Before I was elected to the General Assembly, I was a Fairfax County prosecutor. I worked for our Commonwealth's Attorney, Robert Horan, who's been our Commonwealth's Attorney since 1967. And Mr. Horan asked me if I would be one of the two prosecutors in Fairfax who dealt with all the prosecutions involving children who were the victims of sexual crimes. It was a great honor for me to have that responsibility. It's a great honor for me to serve the people of Fairfax County in the Virginia General Assembly.
Mark, as an incumbent, the first question I have to ask you is, you've served a period of time now in Richmond. Tell us about your accomplishments. I think that's what the viewers would like to hear about.
Yeah. Well, by far the biggest issue we've had to deal with is transportation, and I'm really proud of a number of projects that I've been able to get funded and help secure funding for, and one of them along Route 50 between Route 28 and South Riding. There's a really bad bottleneck there. The road shrinks from 6 lanes down to 4 lanes before it widens out to 6 lanes again at South Riding. I heard from a lot of folks in Chantilly, South Riding, who use Route 50, and working with Delegate Chuck Caputo, we were able to secure funding for the widening in that bottleneck and take care of that. And hopefully, now we're working to try and get the contract expedited and let sometime next year. So that's one tangible accomplishment, and we've got a lot of others in the transportation area. We've secured funding now for the remaining interchanges on Route 28, which is a huge success. So you see traffic lights coming out now and interchanges going in. If you drive by on Route 28 today, you'll see earth being moved for the Noakes Boulevard interchange and for the CIT interchange. And then next will be Frying Pan, and then Willard Road, and that's going to be a tremendous benefit. We've also gotten funding for Route 7 between Sterling and Reston. So those are just a few of what I think are some major successes in the transportation area.
Steve, how about you? Give us a piece of significant legislation that you're particularly proud of.
Well, my first session was the 2004 General Assembly session. It was historic for many reasons. That is the year that Governor Mark Warner passed a historic budget that made a record investment in public education, reinvested in higher education for the first time in years, made a record investment in public safety and in human services. I served on the House Finance Committee at the time. I still serve on that committee. That is one of the two money committees in the House of Delegates. And so we were largely responsible for trying to push the governor's budget through that committee. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done in many areas, but what we did that year was critically important to the long-term interests of Virginia. For example, at the time, our credit rating was on the line. The credit rating agencies up in New York said, we're not sure the way that your books balance right now, whether you can have a AAA bond rating. That's the highest bond rating you can have. After we made that historic investment in 2004, we remained one of a handful of states to have that. That year, we were also named the best managed state in the country, and we've been able to keep that record of being the best managed state. And I think it's because we're careful fiscal stewards of the people's money. On the House Finance Committee, I spend a tremendous amount of time doing that. Another area that's a deep interest to me has to do with public safety and child safety. I serve on the Governor's Commission on Sexual Violence. I am the committee chairperson of the subcommittee on treatment and intervention, and we're charged with giving the governor a series of recommendations that will manifest itself in the form of legislation this coming year that hopefully will make the administration of justice better for victims of crime. It's a very important role, and I'm honored to serve on that commission.
Let me follow up on that. I was looking at your website and your bio, and you were involved in the AMBER project even before you were elected as a delegate here in Virginia. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
At the time, when my wife and I, when Abby and I decided we wanted to try to bring the AMBER Alert to the Washington metropolitan area, the AMBER Alert was not a household name. The AMBER Alert was named after a young girl named Amber Hagerman down in Texas, who was taken outside of her home one day. Fortunately, she was murdered. And out of a sense of grief, the community decided to put together a program. In fact, the way it happened was there was a talk radio show, and somebody called in and said, I don't understand, when this young child was missing, why weren't the radio stations and the TV stations announcing this so that we could all be looking for the child? That was the catalyst for the AMBER Alert program. My wife, who was working up on the Hill at the time, learned about this program and said, Steve, this is really something that we could bring to the area. So what we did was we met with the chiefs of police who were with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. We got them to sign on to the idea that Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Northern Virginia really have a regional interest in trying to look out for all of our children when one of them is missing. It was about a 2-year effort. We got the radio stations and the TV stations on board. And then in 2001, we launched what was known as the Metropolitan Washington AMBER Alert program. And it covered about a jurisdiction of 4 million people. Since that time, Virginia has launched a statewide AMBER Alert program. Maryland has done a statewide AMBER Alert program. In fact, almost every state in the country has done it. And we were really very pleased to play a small role in that project.
Excellent. Senator Herring, one of the things we had talked about was the role you played in impact fees. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, in the area I represent, growth management is an important issue, and one of the things that I did was introduce legislation to provide local communities with more tools to better manage growth and development. One of them is an impact fee. It will allow the local communities to assess a reasonable impact fee on new development so that it will be more likely that the infrastructure will be in place as new development occurs, so the tax burden doesn't fall unnecessarily, so it doesn't fall so hard on existing taxpayers and homeowners. And so that was one of the bills while the final version didn't make it exactly in the same form, a piece of it came through, and local communities will now be able to do that. And something else I did that was very important. We began to hear in and around the state that some developers were actually suing citizens who spoke out at public hearings when development projects would be considered. And the hope was that by suing the citizens, that would intimidate them from coming forward and talking to their county supervisors and town councils and discourage their participation in the public process. Those are known as strategic lawsuits against public participation. And when I heard that was happening in Virginia, I thought it was important that we protect citizens. I brought forward legislation known as the anti-SLAPP suit bill, and now citizens will be protected when they come and speak at public hearings. I think public participation is essential in good decision-making, and it needs to be encouraged without fear of abusive lawsuits.
My recollection is that Loudoun County is one of the, if not the fastest growing county in the nation right now, it's certainly one of them. And I can fully understand the need for responsible growth as opposed to haphazard growth. Delegate Shannon, let's talk a little bit about Chesapeake Bay. Your district lies within the Chesapeake Bay watershed, as does, I believe, all of Fairfax County and some of Loudoun County. You had worked on some issues involving the cleanup.
Well, one of my three committees is the House Committee on Natural Resources, Chesapeake Bay and Agriculture. So we spend a tremendous amount of time studying issues pertaining to the Bay. The Environmental Protection Agency has declared the Chesapeake Bay an impaired watershed, which is really a crime. It's a crime from both a natural preservation point of view, but also an economic development point of view. We are under court order to take steps necessary so that the EPA will take us off the impaired watershed list. It's not easy to do. It requires a dedicated effort from many states. It's not just Virginia that has contributed to the pollution in the Chesapeake Bay. But we made a significant investment over the past year. In fact, we dedicated $250 million, and Senator Herring was wonderful pushing this through the Senate, specifically dedicated to doing what we can to clean up the Bay. Now that is just a start. We have a long way to go, and there are many reasons when you look at stormwater runoff, when you look at best management practices at farmlands, when you look at pollutants in the air, particularly those coming from other states. There are many contributory factors to pollution, but the fact remains that as Virginians, it's our responsibility to do what we can to clean up the Bay, and we're deeply committed to that here.
We have one phone call which we're going to put off until after our upcoming break. I just want to remind the viewers that we can be reached at 571-749-1166, and we certainly welcome your phone calls. We're here tonight with Senator Mark Herring of the 33rd Senate District, which encompasses part of Fairfax and Loudoun counties, and Delegate Steve Shannon with the 35th Delegate District, which is in Fairfax County. So we encourage you to call, and we will be back shortly after the break, and we'll have more with Senator Herring and Delegate Shannon.
This is Mommy's bed. Me and Jenny were jumping on it. Mommy's gun fell on the floor. I was a cowboy. Bang, 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 bang. I said, Jenny, wake up, it's just pretend. But she wouldn't wake up. If you give me a fish...
If you give someone a fish,
You feed them for a day.
Teach someone to fish.
you feed them for a lifetime.
Give me a fish, and you'll feed me for a day. Teach me to fish, and you'll feed me for a lifetime.
Through
Volunteers of America, you can help change lives in your community.
Senator Mark Herring, 33rd Senate District, and Delegate Steve Shannon, 35th Delegate District. And we're going to go right into a call from Jay from Leesburg. Good afternoon, or good evening, I should say.
Oh, good evening. How are you?
Good. How are you? What's your question, Jay?
Well, my question is for both delegates. Senator Herring, first I want to thank you for all your support to the Guard. And also I want to thank you for your appearances at all of the local going away parties that we had up here at Heritage and in Leesburg. I just wanted to know, have you been able to support the Virginia Defense Force, who now is subsuming all of the roles within the armories and also the homeland support issues? Have you been able to push anything forward? These are mostly retired or other able-bodied men and women who have stepped forward as volunteers to back up these guardsmen and their families while they're gone.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for calling and for your question. First, I'd like to express my support for the members of the National Guard and Virginia Defense Force, and the Guard has done a tremendous service. Virginia is a state that our nation has always been able to count on, and when in times of either natural disaster or when being requested for help from the federal government for a federal mission. And in early January, approximately, I think, 66 National Guard soldiers from Company C, which is the local hometown unit in Leesburg, were called up and deployed. And then just recently, I think on June 27th, 131 National Guard soldiers were deployed in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. And I think as a state senator, it's my responsibility to do everything I can to support those soldiers from Company C and the National Guard and their families for the service that they provide. And I've tried to work with the Guard unit and the Family Readiness Group liaison to find out what I and others in our community can do in order to help them. I think it's important that we do everything we can to support the troops and the families. One of the things that I would like to try and do, and that most recent deployment occurred in June, and as a part-time legislature, we meet in January and February, and what I'm looking at doing is finding out whether we can use some of the training money that was previously allocated for the Guard training. Now that a lot of those troops are being deployed, can we redirect the funding to the Virginia Defense Force? One of the things I'm concerned about is what happens in Virginia if there is a natural disaster. Unfortunately, we have the Virginia Defense Force there, but they're going to need additional training and additional support. And that's one of the things that I'm working with the Adjutant General on to see how we can better use those resources.
Steve, want to add anything?
Last week I met with the Assistant to the Governor for Domestic Preparedness, Bob Crouch, and this is one of the several issues that we were talking about. It's critically important that we support our National Guard. So many times when we are thinking about the war and our troops, we're thinking on a federal level, but it has very real state implications. At the state level, so many times that's where the rubber hits the road, and when it comes to issues such as survivor benefits and how to help the children if they lose a parent, that's really our responsibility. Governor Kane has spent a tremendous amount of time trying to think through those issues, working with other governors, working with the legislature on that. I joined Senator Herring and the majority of my colleagues down in the General Assembly. We're going to do everything we can to support our National Guard and support our troops. And I just applaud Senator Herring for the work he's doing right now.
It's also important to whenever we're out meeting with constituents and groups, to remind them that these are local soldiers being deployed. They're coming from our own communities, and about 80% of the district that I represent is in Loudoun County, and so they're coming from Leesburg and Ashburn and Brambleton and South Riding and Sterling and Herndon. And it's important for people around the district to know that these are soldiers who are a vital part of our community, and they're being called to leave their homes, their families, their schools, and their jobs for this federal mission, and it's important we do everything we can to support them and their families.
These citizen soldiers are making an incredible sacrifice, as you well know, as I do and as Steve does. We were all at a dinner last night where there was a young man who was recognized after 2 tours of duty in Iraq, who came back with some injuries, and he's going to recuperate, but he's got a long recuperation period, and he was honored and recognized last night. Well, thank you for the call, Jay. We have another call now from Norm in Falls Church. How are you, Norm?
Great, thank you. Delegate Shannon, Senator Herring, good evening.
Good evening.
I've noticed from your website you both seem to be very strong supporters of education. Education is very important to those of us who live here in Fairfax County. I know a large portion of our real estate taxes go through education. Would you propose any new legislation that will give us more bang for our education bucks here in the county and in the Commonwealth in the next session?
Steve, why don't you start this one?
Sure. Norm, I want to thank you for calling and putting in a plug for public education. As I indicated a little earlier, the 2004 budget made a record investment in K through 12 public education across the state. It's important, though, that we make sure that the money is being used wisely. One of the programs we set up in 2004, which has had enormous success, has to do with using state resources to go into school districts for purposes of conducting efficiency reviews. Now, this is not a state mandate. A school district can voluntarily opt to do it. But what we do is we utilize the resources of the state government, and if the local school district is willing to pay for 25% of the share of this audit, we'll pick up the other 75%. There is a waiting list right now. The 19 school districts since 2004 that have voluntarily participated in the school efficiency review have each found at least $15 million of cost savings. Now, one concern that some expressed early on is, well, if you find those savings, it's just going to go to some other part of government. You know, government is the business of allocating scarce resources. So what our commitment is we're not going to take the money out of public education. We're going to try to find ways to find operational efficiencies. We're not going to critique teachers on how they're teaching. Our goal was to try to find efficiencies so that they can spend more money in the classroom. And I think that's exactly what Norm is alluding to. We have to be efficient as well as making the investment that we need in public education. Because indeed, in both Fairfax County and Loudoun County, that is a major reason why young families come here. It's because the school district is so good. They want to invest in their children, and we're committed to doing that.
Mark?
I was very pleased to co-sponsor a government efficiency bill that Delegate Shannon proposed, and those types of efficiencies and savings are what can help us make sure that money is best spent and we get the biggest bang for the buck. And we were able to provide a needed teacher salary increase this year of 3%, and that's making sure that we are able to recruit and retain the best teachers in every classroom is critically important.
Teachers perform a tremendous service here in Fairfax and in Loudoun counties and across the nation. Sometimes it galls me a little bit that movie stars make millions of dollars for what they do, but teachers who are working very hard, spending a great deal of hours not only in the classroom but preparing for classroom work, are, in my opinion, underpaid. Obviously, we have the strictures of government and limited amounts of money to spend, but any time we can give a teacher a raise, I think is a good thing. Moving on, and I just want to remind the viewers that we are prepared to take your calls at 571-749-1166. Teenage drivers. I think both of you had a hand in a piece of legislation that passed the legislature this year.
Well, one of the measures that passed this year was a bill that would restrict the ability of teenagers, our youngest drivers, 16 and 17-year-olds, from driving while talking on the cell phone. We found that studies had shown that there was a clear connection between young drivers and distractions, that young drivers were more easily distracted, and this was a way to improve public safety. And I can tell you, as a father of a teenage daughter, it's an important step to make sure that our younger drivers are not talking on the cell phone while they need to be paying attention and driving. And I've heard from a lot of parents, too, who appreciate the fact that this type of legislation reinforces the good parenting skills that we as parents want to teach our children to pay attention when they're driving, and I've gotten a lot of very positive feedback from parents in the district about that.
Steve, I know you have younger children, but they will grow up to be teenagers. We both know.
This is a good opportunity to talk about collaboration. Government works best when our federal representatives work well with state representatives, and state representatives work well with their local elected officials. This was a very high priority for the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, getting this legislation passed. Each year, the Board of Supervisors meets with the Fairfax delegation, both in the Senate and the House, and they let us know what the priorities are. And this was a measure that they believed was in the interest of the public good, and in particular in the interest of child safety. I was pleased to support it, and I think it's going to save lives.
Well, thank you for watching the first half of the program. We're going to take a break. I encourage you to call us at 571-749-1166, and we will be back in a couple of minutes. Thank you very much.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God.
My name is David Bell. I am a resident of Virginia's 11th Congressional District, and I ask Representative Tom Davis to initiate or support investigations into violations of the law by President Bush and his administration.
Tom Davis, my name is Jean Reynolds, and I'm one of your constituents. I want you to join immediately with other members of Congress to begin an investigation of the criminal acts that George Bush has committed.
I'm Nick Spengler of Ashland, Virginia, and I would like our troops to come home and Bush to get out of office.
My name is Nancy Maynard. I live in the 11th Congressional District, and this message is for Tom Davis. I'm asking you to please investigate for impeachment.
My name is Bruce Smith. I live in the 11th Congressional District in Woodbridge, Virginia. I want Congressman Davis to support the investigation of President Bush and Vice President Cheney and those that foisted this war on us.
Hello, Congressman Davis. I'm Carrie Ponson from the 11th Congressional District, and I'd like you to take immediate action to investigate George Bush and his offenses in leading this country into a war that's unwarranted and there is no solution for.
We have to impeach. I am just appalled that we would not, quote, waste our time with impeachment. The message to the world has to be that Bush and Cheney are guilty of international war crimes about which we can't do anything. We can do a lot about the crimes committed within the U.S. Constitution.
Inside Scoop, Virginia. My name is George Burke. We're here today with Senator Mark Herring of the 33rd Senate District and Delegate Steve Shannon of the 35th Delegate District. Mark, why don't you describe for the viewers a little bit the makeup of your district geographically?
Well, by population, it's about 80% in Loudoun, 20% in Fairfax. The portion in Fairfax is between the toll road and Route 50, heading east toward Fox Mill and West Ox. In Loudoun County, it's most of Leesburg and everything east of Route 15, so it includes the communities of Leesburg, Ashburn, South Riding, Sterling, so a lot of, all of eastern Loudoun. Mm-hmm. And it's a tremendous district to represent. I'll tell you, as kind of a newly elected state senator, having been there for 18 months, There are times when it's challenging and frustrating, but there are also times when it's extremely rewarding. And when we're able to put aside partisan differences and work together, we can actually get a lot of the things done. And one of the really neat things, in addition to all the things we've talked about, but one of the really neat things is to be able to help some people when they come to you with a problem. And I remember I got a call from a constituent. She's a woman of very modest means, and she happens to be blind. And she could not ordinarily afford a home on her own in Northern Virginia because of the cost of living. And what she did was she talked to a friend who also was of modest means and could not afford a home of their own, so they bought a home together. And there is a program that most communities have. It's a real estate tax relief program for the elderly and permanently disabled. And for a while, she was getting a proportionate share of tax relief because of her permanent disability, and she met the qualifications. And then the Commissioner of the Revenue determined that no, she wasn't eligible because she co-owned her home with someone who happened to be able-bodied and was not over 65. So she came to me with that, and we looked at it, and it just didn't seem right. Here was an opportunity to encourage home ownership in Northern Virginia, to help out those who are permanently disabled or elderly and of very modest means, and help them, stay in their own home. This person had needed some help getting around because she was blind, and that person helps out on maintenance and so forth. And so we put together a bill, presented it to the different finance committees, and I was very grateful to have the support on the finance committee over in the House from Delegate Shannon. And it was really a good feeling to be able to get this bill passed, so some more of our elderly and older Virginians and those who are permanently disabled can take advantage of the program that was really designed for them.
I lived in a state, which I will not mention by name, that relied solely on property taxes to finance the town government as well as the schools. And because of that, they were very reluctant to give tax breaks to the elderly. And as property values rose and property taxes increased, some of these senior citizens literally had to give up their homes because they couldn't afford the taxes on them.
And in this particular instance, this was one in which when AARP heard about the bill, they came in and strongly supported it because it encouraged arrangements that would allow older residents to remain in their homes longer. So if you had a young person who couldn't afford a large down payment and otherwise wouldn't be able to afford a home, and you could pair with an older resident who needs some help around the house to help with the maintenance and would like some additional cash to get by, it really encourages that type of arrangement.
Steve, describe your district. I know it contains the town of Vienna, but there's much, much more to it than that.
It does. I represent a portion of Dunloring and half of Tyson's Corner. I go up to Route 7. I've taken the Vienna side of Route 7. I have all of the town of Vienna. To the north of the town of Vienna, I go all the way up to the Barns of Wolf Trap at the toll road. Then heading out west, I take in Oakton. I circle around Fairfax City, and then I take in all the development that's going on around the Fairfax Government Center. The 35th House District had the distinction last year of representing the town of Vienna, which was named the 4th best place to live in the country. And that was a very big deal. The town of Vienna is a special place. It's got a small town feel in a county that has over 1 million people. We really treasure that. If you ever drive down 123 going to work, you always see traffic, but what a lot of people don't see is the sense of community that's in the town of Vienna. It really is just a privilege representing that area.
There's a restaurant in Vienna that it seems they serve hot dogs, and all the politicians end up making a pilgrimage there sometime during the campaign.
Right.
What is that place?
My friend Marty Volk owns the Vienna Inn, and it's a great restaurant. Everybody goes there. I go there with my children, and you see people of all ages. A lot of the sports teams go there. It is really a community restaurant. And the thing I really love about the way that Marty runs his business is he gives back to the community. I love seeing people who give to the community and then they do well in business. And that's sort of the model of a lot of the guys in the area. and it contributes a great deal to the sense of community that we have here.
Vienna has a lot of festivals and things throughout the year, but they also have an annual Halloween parade. That's another place that I recall just many politicians with floats and the like, and it draws out an incredible crowd.
We have three really big events that bring people from the Washington metropolitan area to our community. We have Viva Vienna, which is along Church Street. We have the 4th of July at the community center, and then we have the Halloween parade. They close off Maple Avenue, which is 123 as it goes through the town, and it is really the highlight for our community. My kids love walking in it with me. We got lots of kids having fun. People bring out the balloons, the floats. Everybody has a good time. It is a classic small town having a parade. And that's really what contributes a great deal to the sense of community we have here.
Let's talk a little bit more about the environment. It's certainly an issue, I think, that has been highlighted in recent months by former Vice President and Senator Al Gore. He had his movie out, The Inconvenient Truth, and it just seems to me that local governments, the legislature, the General Assembly, and citizens in general are paying a lot more attention, again, to the environment these days. What are you folks doing in Richmond?
Well, I think there are a lot of different areas that we're looking at that need attention. I think one of the goals that the governor has set out is to preserve 400,000 acres of open space in the next few years. I'm very pleased to serve on the Legislative Study Committee, the Open Space and Preservation Study Committee. And this past General Assembly session, because that tended to be a program that might benefit certain parts of the state and not others, we added parkland, in particular for Northern Virginia, as one of the things that needed to be studied. And as the community in Northern Virginia continues to grow, it's going to be important to make sure that we preserve and set aside some land for parks, for recreation, for open space, so that we can all enjoy those things that make a lot of Northern Virginia a very special place.
I consider myself very lucky. Where I live in Fairfax, I butt up against a park that is really not developed. It has a few people ride their bikes down the trail. There's a couple of benches in there, but for all intents and purposes, it's been left in its natural state. It has a run that comes through it that is fairly small, and it's not storming, and very large when it is, and I feel very blessed with the wildlife we see, et cetera, except when the raccoons get into my trash and the deer eat my wife's plants. Steve, House of Delegates, what else is happening on the environment there?
Well, the governor's initiative to preserve 400,000 acres of open space over his 4-year term is a major initiative. We talked a little bit earlier about the Chesapeake Bay being on the impaired watershed list. That is a real priority of the General Assembly. One, because it is a natural treasure, but two, we're under a court order to do something about it. In Northern Virginia, the air quality is in the non-attainment zone, and so we are working with our regional and local partners to find ways to get us off the non-attainment list. It's difficult to do. People want to come to Northern Virginia. When you come to Northern Virginia, you have more cars and you have more traffic, and when you have more traffic, there's more gridlock, and so the level of emissions has increased significantly. In fact, Senator Herring and I have sponsored legislation specifically to try to look at just how much emissions are being put out on a region-by-region basis, particularly due to cars and due to traffic. It's something we weren't successful with in the last session, but we're going to be pushing it. You mentioned the Vice President Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth. I think for a lot of legislators, a lot of people in public service, it's not that they didn't care about the environment, it's just they didn't realize the devastating effects of global warming. They didn't realize fully the effect of energy dependence. And you see initiatives in California and other states where The state is trying to step up to respond to the fact that the federal government just is not doing enough in terms of national policy. That's really the direction where we need to be headed. I think that's some of the thought process that went into Governor Kane trying to preserve 400 acres of open space, but we've got a long way to go.
400,000.
400,000 acres of open space.
Let's talk a little bit about crime while I have you. You have a background as a prosecutor, and I know you've been very active on some of those issues in the General Assembly and the House of Delegates.
Well, Fairfax County, of the 50 major metropolitan areas in the United States, when you look empirically, we are the safest major metropolitan jurisdiction in the country. But I say that in a relative sense. Crime does exist, and we need to be vigilant. Part of the way that we're vigilant is to support our first responders, support our police, support our sheriff's deputies, support our firefighters. We've tried to do that over the past years in the way that we create our budget and the way that we try to give first responders enough money so that they can be career professionals. They don't have to pull 2 or 3 years and then go into another area. So the funding of how to recruit and retain first-class first responders is a major responsibility of the General Assembly. The other component has to do with the laws that we all have to live by and the administration of justice. With regard to the administration of justice, that's something that the Governor's Commission on Sexual Violence, we're looking at very carefully. You know, I think we do a good job, but we can always do better. And let me just give you one example. I mentioned earlier that I was one of the areas that I specialized in when I was a Fairfax County prosecutor had to do with prosecuting people who were charged with sexual offenses against children. I received a letter from somebody who she was a victim of a rape, and the Commonwealth's attorney in that jurisdiction successfully prosecuted the case, and the guy went to prison. And the guy filed what's known as a habeas petition, and he did it on his own. He didn't have an attorney, and what he's basically saying is, I want a new trial. The appellate court looked at what he was saying and ruled that there was no basis to give you a new trial. You had a fair trial, you had counsel, and you were convicted of rape. The appellate court issued a written decision, and in the written decision they named the woman who was the victim by name, and they recounted the facts. Well, with the advent of technology, what our appellate courts have begun to do is to put up their written decisions on their webpage. The woman who wrote me said that she had been out with somebody, and it was the first time they'd been out, and the guy did a Google search on her, and the first thing that came up was this pleading, or this case from the Court of Appeals saying that this woman was the victim of a rape crime. We don't need to
Some people in Fairfax County don't know what public access means.
It's just another channel on the dial.
But it's much more than that.
It's the voice of the people.
People like you.
Your neighbors, your friends,
or your family.
People who want to share ideas,
opinions,
cultures, lifestyles,
art,
sports, music,
events, entertainment,
history,
science,
beliefs.
People who want to learn about television,
producing,
directing,
cameras, audio,
lighting,
editing, or radio, talk, music.
Whatever you think people should hear.
Public access is the place where everyone has a voice.
And it's the place where that voice gets heard.
A place where you can create your own form of personal expression.
So what do you want to say?
Whatever it is.
You can say it here.
Because we're public access.
For the people.
By the people.
It is about balancing our choices between the gray of the concrete jungle and the stunning beauty of the red one, between the stoic facade of granite and the fury of the canyon. That's why there's EarthShare, the simple way to find balance. EarthShare is the workplace giving program bringing the leading environmental groups under one umbrella. Support EarthShare, support them all. EarthShare. Please ask your employer about workplace giving. To learn more, visit our website. Thousands of kids in this country have everything it takes to go to college, except the money. The United Negro College Fund. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
Welcome back to Inside Virginia. We have Senator Mark Herring, the 33rd Senate District, and Steve Shannon, delegate from the 35th District. Steve, we were talking about crime when we were so rudely interrupted by that public service announcement.
Feels just like the General Assembly.
I hope you can regain the momentum on this issue.
The idea that the criminal justice system should not re-traumatize victims is something that's very important to a lot of us. And being a prosecutor for so many years, I just met so many victims and learned about their lives and learned about their trauma. And so I think I'm sensitized to it. So going back to the legislation we passed said that if a victim of a sexual crime requests that the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court of Virginia not use their name in any of their written decisions, it is non-discretionary. The court shall not use their name. That issue goes right into the issue of personal security, data security, ID security. With technology is a powerful thing, and it's a wonderful thing, but government also has a great deal of information, and we need to figure out how to preserve and protect people's privacy. And those are some of the issues we're wrestling with in the context of the administration of justice and making our criminal justice system better for victims of crime.
It's tough. So much information is available today on the internet, and while it can be very helpful, it as you said, it exposes people as well who don't deserve to have victims who don't deserve to have some of their names exposed or some of the other matters about their life or their property for that matter. Senator, I know you have played a key role in higher education issues. We have a great university system here in Virginia, but we still are faced with the problems of there never seems to be enough money to do everything that needs to be accomplished. Our universities continue to grow. They grow not only in size but in stature. How do we preserve that? What are you doing to help us preserve the integrity of our universities and colleges across the state?
Well, you're right. Virginia is blessed with a reputation for having some of the best, and well-deserved reputation for having some of the best colleges and universities in America. It's something that we as Virginians are very proud of. And a couple of things that are kind of close to home. Some of our community colleges are really bursting at the seams. And in the first General Assembly session, we were successful. My first session, we were successful in getting $27 million in the budget for a new classroom building for the Northern Virginia Community College for the Loudoun campus. That's one that serves Herndon, Sterling, and Loudoun and Western Fairfax counties. And so that classroom building is underway, and it's going to be a tremendous asset for the community college here. And speaking of community colleges, another thing that we did this past session was provide a tuition assistance grant for Virginia students who are attending one of Virginia's community colleges and would like to transfer from a 2-year degree program to a 4-year degree program at one of Virginia's colleges or universities. And so you would provide a $1,000 tuition assistance grant for that, $2,000 if they're going into a math, science, or nursing type degree where those types of professionals are in such high demand.
Steve?
I mentioned earlier that in 2004, we began reinvesting in our institutions of higher learning. Higher education has enormous economic implications for the state. A couple weeks ago, I brought up a delegation of other legislators from other parts of the state to meet with some of our industry leaders in technology. So we went to Micron and Oracle, AOL, Microsoft. We're talking with them about their business, their labor force, and the specific issue that I was asking them is, what are we doing to keep you here? Why are you here in the first place? And what all 4 of those companies said, industry titans, was that your system of higher education allows us to get the workers we need. And we need to recognize that and realize that public education and higher education is just that. It's public. It's public funds. It shouldn't be quasi-private. And so we need to keep investing. We need to make sure that higher education is affordable to everybody, so everybody has the opportunity to work at these wonderful companies that we have, not just in Northern Virginia, but across the state.
So what we're saying, and what is in fact truth, is that our economy is integrated directly into these educational institutions as well. Our economy grows because we produce good products from those colleges and universities.
And if we're going to be actively out there in a globally competitive marketplace, we need to make sure that our young adults are prepared for that and have all the tools they need to succeed in that type of an economy.
Let's get on to the grand kahuna of issues that's certainly on the minds of many Northern Virginians, and I suspect in Hampton Road and a few other areas of the state as well, and that is transportation. We've talked about a couple of specific projects and the like, but the reality of the matter is Northern Virginia is a relatively affluent area. Most households don't just have 2 cars, they may have 3 or 4 cars. I know I have 3 in my driveway on a regular basis, and sometimes 4 if my other son comes home. Just moving him around the driveway is a traffic jam. Steve, I'll let you address this first. And I know it's an enormous issue and we have to focus on a piece of it, but I welcome your thoughts.
Transportation, and in particular transportation funding, is a state responsibility. The Commonwealth of Virginia took over that responsibility during the Great Depression. We were trying to provide relief to local government, but the state maintains more miles of highway than California, for example. We've got over 9,000 miles of public highway that the state has to maintain, and it costs money. And it costs money to fund our rail system, our metro system. Prior to the past year or two, the last time we made a major investment in our transportation infrastructure was over 20 years ago. It was during Governor Belisle's administration. The fact of the matter is that the cost of capital has gone up, and we have not created new revenue sources for transportation. And we see the direct effect of that in Northern Virginia in particular. They also see it down in the Tidewater area. It has been a real struggle, particularly for Democrats, to try to get transportation funding up here. You saw in 2002, which was before the senator and I were elected, Governor Warner pushed to have a local transportation referendum in Northern Virginia and Tidewater. He was unsuccessful with that. In 2004, which was our historic budget, we did many great things for the Commonwealth: public education, higher education, public safety, but we fell short with regard to transportation. In 2005, we were able to put about $848 million into our transportation infrastructure, but that was one-time money. It was not a steady stream of funds. And you can't build new projects based on 1 year of money. It needs to be a dedicated source of revenue over time. Governor Kane came into office and transportation was one of his 4 top priorities. We spent the whole first session of the General Assembly trying to find a transportation funding package. We were unsuccessful. He called us together for a special session to deal specifically with the issue of transportation. Again, we got nothing done. This past session of the General Assembly is what I would call a decent start. But if there's one thing that legislators should have learned from all this, it's that you can't wait 20 years before addressing the issue of transportation. This is something that you need to address every year. There are some good things about the bill we passed. There are some things I wish did not pass. But it was a classic compromise piece of legislation. And the cost of inactivity for another year to many of us was simply unacceptable. Now, I'll be the first to say that when we go back to the General Assembly, there are going to be things in that package that we need to change. But it is a good start. For those who think that we just need to put that issue behind us, they simply are not looking at the long-term interests of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
I think it is a significant step forward, though it may not be perfect, but it's a big step forward. The package will provide somewhere near $500 million per year of new transportation funding for Northern Virginia, $1.5 billion statewide. All of the new money raised in Northern Virginia will stay in Northern Virginia. It's not going to go down to Richmond to be diverted for other purposes. Local Northern Virginia officials will decide where in Northern Virginia that money goes. It's not going to be done by the General Assembly. It's not going to be done by folks down in Richmond to be spent other places. It's going to stay right here. And already, I could see the difference in terms of the projects that are going to be funded soon. And so I think it's a significant step forward.
I can't remember who said it, but there was some observer of government who once said that the passing legislation was like making sausage. And certainly the needs of Northern Virginia don't necessarily always coincide with the needs of more rural communities in other parts of the Commonwealth. That's just a fact of life. And I don't think the quality of life in Virginia would be the same if we didn't have those rural areas, if Northern Virginia stood alone. So part of it is the fact that the transportation bill has to address many different needs in many different parts of the state. Both of you are up for re-election this year, and we're running out of time. We only have about 30 seconds left. But I'd ask, there's one thing you always need to do when you're running for re-election, and that is ask for the vote of your constituents. And if I could ask in 15 seconds each, if you could just do that, or if you would like to do that.
Sure. Well, I'm running for re-election to build on the success that we've already had in the area of transportation, education, making sure our schools remain among the best in the nation, and making sure that our local communities have the tools they need to better manage growth and development.
Steve?
It's been my privilege to serve the people of the 35th District for the past 2 terms, and I'd be honored to serve again. Every day I try to help one family, one neighborhood, one community. I try to do that when I'm down in Richmond when I'm voting. I try to do it in the off-season with constituent services. I hope I can earn your vote in November.